Dear listeners, welcome to History with Herodotus, where we embark on a journey through the annals of time, unraveling the mysteries of our collective past. Today, we find ourselves in the midst of one of the most pivotal conflicts in European history, the Great Northern War. This tumultuous period, which ravaged the continent from 1721, was a complex tapestry woven from the threads of politics, diplomacy, and warfare. Imagine yourself standing on the windswept shores of the Baltic Sea, where the chill of winter bites deep into the bones. The salty air fills your lungs as you gaze out upon the icy waters, which stretch towards the horizon like an endless canvas of frozen possibility. It is here, in the late 17th century, that the seeds of the Great Northern War were sown. The region, a melting pot of cultures and empires, was home to the Swedish Empire, whose dominion stretched from the frozen tundras of Lapland to the sun-kissed fields of Poland. Under the rule of King Charles XVII, Sweden had reached the zenith of its power, with a strong military and a robust economy. The king's wise leadership and strategic alliances had secured Sweden's position as a major player in European politics. However, the death of King Charles IX in 1697 marked a turning point, as his son, Charles XII, was only 15 years old at the time. The Regency Council, which governed on behalf of the young king, faced significant challenges in maintaining the country's position in the face of growing external threats. To the south, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, under the leadership of King Augustus II, was seeking to expand its territories and secure its borders. Meanwhile, Russia, under the rule of Peter the Great, was emerging as a major power, with ambitions to gain access to the Baltic Sea and challenge Swedish dominance in the region. In 1698, the Treaty of Preobrazhenskoye was signed between Russia and Denmark-Norway, marking the beginning of an alliance that would eventually become known as the Great Northern Alliance. This coalition, which would eventually include Saxony-Poland, was driven by a desire to limit Swedish expansion and protect the interests of its member states. As we explore the earliest history of this conflict, it becomes clear that the seeds of war were sown in the complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterized European politics at the time. The struggle for dominance in the Baltic region, which had been simmering for centuries, was about to boil over into a full-scale conflict. In 1700, the Great Northern Alliance launched a coordinated attack on Swedish territories, marking the beginning of the Great Northern War. The war would rage on for over 2 decades, involving multiple countries and empires, and leaving an indelible mark on the map of Europe. And so, dear listeners, we have set the stage for the tumultuous events that were about to unfold. Join me next as we venture into the heart of the Great Northern War, where the fate of empires hung in the balance, and the course of European history was forever altered. Dear listeners, welcome back to History with Herodotus, where we continue our journey through the annals of time, unraveling the mysteries of our collective past. Today, we find ourselves in the midst of this tumultuous conflict as it reaches its zenith. Imagine yourself standing on the battle-scarred fields of Narva, Estonia, where the chill of winter bites deep into the bones. The year is 1700, and the Swedish army, led by the young King Charles XII, has just dealt a crushing blow to the Russian forces under Peter the Great. The victory at Narva marked a turning point in the war, as Sweden's military prowess and strategic alliances seemed unstoppable. As we delve deeper into this period, it becomes clear that King Charles XII was a brilliant military strategist, whose campaigns would take him from the frozen tundras of Scandinavia to the sun-kissed fields of Poland. His armies, disciplined and well-trained, would march across the continent, leaving a trail of victories in their wake. The Swedish king's leadership and charisma inspired loyalty among his troops, who would follow him into the very depths of hell. One of the most significant events of this period was the Battle of Klissow, fought on July 8, 1702, near the town of Klissow, Poland. The Swedish army, outnumbered and outgunned, emerged victorious against the combined forces of Saxony, Poland, and Russia. This battle showcased King Charles XII's tactical genius, as he exploited the weaknesses of his enemies and led his troops to a decisive victory. As the war raged on, the Swedish Empire reached its greatest extent, with territories stretching from present-day Finland to Poland, and from Estonia to Norway. The kingdom's economy flourished, fueled by trade and commerce, which brought wealth and prosperity to its citizens. However, this period of greatness was not without its challenges, as the constant warfare took a toll on the Swedish people, and the empire's resources began to dwindle. The Great Northern War also saw the emergence of other notable figures, such as Peter the Great, who would go on to become one of Russia's most revered leaders. Despite his initial defeats at the hands of King Charles XII, Peter persevered, reforming his military, and eventually turning the tide of the war in favor of Russia. As we reflect on this pivotal period in European history, it becomes clear that the Great Northern War was a complex and multifaceted conflict, driven by the ambitions of mighty powers and the brilliance of legendary leaders. In the words of the Swedish historian Voltaire, the Great Northern War was a war of kings, but also a war of ideas, as the principles of absolutism, liberalism, and nationalism clashed on the battlefields of Europe. And so, dear listeners, we have reached the zenith of the Great Northern War, where the fate of empires hung in the balance, and the course of European history was forever altered. Dear listeners, welcome back to History with Herodotus, where we continue our journey through the annals of time, unraveling the mysteries of our collective past. Today, we find ourselves in the midst of the war's decline and aftermath, as the once mighty powers begin to crumble. The year is 1709, and the Swedish army, led by King Charles XII, has just suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Poltava. Ukraine. The Russian forces, now reformed and rejuvenated under Peter the Great, had dealt a crushing blow to the Swedes, marking a turning point in the war. The loss was catastrophic for Sweden, as thousands of soldiers were killed or captured, and the king himself was forced to flee to the Ottoman Empire. As the war raged on, the Swedish Empire began to contract, with territories being lost to Russia, Poland, and other neighboring countries. The economy, once fueled by trade and commerce, began to dwindle, and the Swedish people suffered greatly under the constant warfare. The kingdom's resources were depleted, and the once mighty military was now weakened and demoralized. Meanwhile, Peter the Great continued to consolidate his power in Russia, implementing reforms and modernizing his military. He had learned from his earlier defeats at the hands of King Charles XII, and had adapted his tactics to counter the Swedish army's strengths. The Russian Empire began to expand its borders, absorbing territories from Sweden and other neighboring countries. The Treaty of Nystad, signed in 1721, marked the official end of the Great Northern War. Sweden ceded significant territories to Russia, including Estonia, Livonia, and Ingria, and recognized Russia as a major power in Europe. The treaty also marked the beginning of a new era in European politics, as the balance of power shifted in favor of Russia and other emerging powers. As we reflect on the decline and aftermath of the Great Northern War, it becomes clear that this conflict had far-reaching consequences for Europe. The war had weakened the Swedish Empire, allowed Russia to emerge as a major power, and set the stage for future conflicts, including the partitions of Poland and the rise of Prussia. In the words of the historian Norman Davies, the Great Northern War was a watershed in European history, marking the end of the Swedish Empire's dominance and the beginning of a new era of Russian expansion. The war had also led to significant cultural and economic exchanges between Europe and Russia, as trade and commerce flourished along the Baltic Sea. And so, dear listeners, we have reached the end of our journey through the Great Northern War. We have witnessed the rise and fall of mighty powers, the brilliance and folly of legendary leaders, and the lasting impact of this conflict on the continent. As we conclude this series, I invite you to join me in reflecting on the significance of this war and its continued relevance in modern times. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.